The sky burned over Chicago. Major David Reynolds stood frozen on the rooftop of the Willis Tower, his hand still pressed to his earpiece as it relayed the frantic communications from around the globe. What had been a routine orbital defense monitoring shift had become the front row to humanity's extinction. They hadn't even declared themselves before they struck. One moment, satellite networks tracked normal cosmic debris, the next, 73 objects decelerated from relativistic speeds directly into Earth's atmosphere. The brass had barely managed to trigger the emergency broadcast when the first kinetic impactors hit Beijing. Shanghai followed 13 seconds later. London, 19 seconds after that. Tokyo was simply gone. Now Reynolds watched as the alien vessel, a dark geometric shape that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, descended through the clouds over Lake Michigan. It had the impossible symmetry of something designed by an intelligence that didn't share humanity's understanding of physics. Smaller craft peeled away from its underside, deploying in a perfect grid pattern across the city. Sir, NORAD confirms 18 more metropolitan centers have been hit. Estimated casualties. The young lieutenant beside him faltered, swallowing hard. How many? Reynolds demanded, his voice tight. Preliminary estimates suggest 23 million, sir. And climbing. Reynolds felt something break inside him. 23 million lives snuffed out in less than 15 minutes. He'd been a combat veteran for 12 years, had seen the horrors of the Sudan conflict firsthand, but this was beyond comprehension. The comm crackled again. All stations, this is Stratcom. We are initiating Protocol Omega. Authentication code Sierra 904 Tango Whiskey. Reynolds' blood ran cold. Protocol Omega, the last-ditch nuclear option. He knew what would follow, every remaining nuclear weapon in the American arsenal launched at the alien vessels. But the preliminary analysis had already determined conventional weapons were useless. The ships had shields that absorbed energy attacks, and their hulls seemed impervious to kinetic strikes. Sir, the lieutenant said, pointing toward the horizon. Reynolds turned to see the first missiles launching from somewhere to the west, probably the silos in North Dakota. They climbed into the sky in perfect arcs, their white contrails drawing lines toward the heavens. The massive vessel over Lake Michigan didn't even attempt evasive maneuvers. Instead, it emitted a pulse of blue-white energy that expanded outward in a perfect sphere. When it met the incoming missiles, they simply ceased to exist. No explosion. No debris. They were there, and then they weren't. Jesus Christ, the lieutenant whispered. Reynolds' secure phone vibrated in his pocket. Only 3 people had this number, his commanding officer, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and his ex-wife Margaret, who worked at DARPA. He pulled it out to see Margaret's name on the screen. Maggie, this isn't. David, shut up and listen, she cut him off, her voice focused and clinical in the way it always got when she was doing something monumentally important. Get to sublevel 16. Authorization code, Theseus Protocol. The entrance is behind the maintenance panel in Service Elevator B. What are you talking about? We need to evacuate. No. They're methodically targeting evacuation routes. Nowhere above ground is safe. Her voice softened momentarily. David, remember Project Lazarus? Reynolds felt his mouth go dry. Project Lazarus, the experimental defensive system that DARPA had been developing in secret for over a decade. The system that had nearly gotten Margaret court-martialed when she pushed to accelerate testing despite safety concerns. That was theoretical, he said quietly. Not anymore. After the quantum breakthrough 3 years ago, we finished the prototype. It's been distributed to 37 hardened facilities worldwide. Chicago has one. Reynolds stared up at the alien ship, now deploying what looked like scanning equipment. Will it work against that? It worked in simulations against technology 5 centuries more advanced than ours. The Lazarus field doesn't just disable technology, it rewrites fundamental physical laws within its radius. But David. Her voice broke slightly. Activation requires a living human consciousness as a processing substrate. The neural link it's a one-way trip. Reynolds understood immediately. A sacrifice play. Yes. And we need someone with strategic military experience to guide the initial deployment. Someone who can think tactically while interfaced with the system. The rooftop door burst open, and 3 more officers rushed out, their faces pale with shock and horror. Below, Reynolds could see smaller alien craft beginning to land in the streets. Wherever they touched down, blue-white energy pulsed outward, and people simply collapsed. They were being harvested. How many can I save? Reynolds asked, his voice suddenly steady. Margaret didn't hesitate. If the Chicago node activates successfully, and it cascades to the other 36 installations as designed? Billions. But David. At the cost of how many? A pause. The 37 volunteers. Plus everyone within the initial Lazarus field radius during stabilization. Which is approximately 12 miles from each activation point. In Chicago, that's about 6 million people, Reynolds finished, watching as more harvesters descended on the city. The math was simple, horrifying, and clear: sacrifice millions now to save billions later. I'll do it, he said. David. They killed 23 million people in 15 minutes, Maggie. They're not here to negotiate. Get me to sublevel 16. Reynolds turned to the officers on the roof. Lieutenant, I need you to implement emergency protocol Theseus. The rest of you, get to the broadcast system and tell everyone to go underground, subways, basements, anywhere below street level. As the officers rushed to comply, Reynolds looked back toward the alien mothership hovering over Lake Michigan, its dark form blotting out the sun. Humanity had been caught unprepared, outgunned, and overwhelmed, but not completely defenseless. Not yet. They think we're just prey, he whispered, his hands clenching into fists as he headed for the stairwell. They're about to learn we're something else entirely. Service Elevator B's maintenance panel looked like any other, gray metal, unremarkable. Reynolds pried it open with trembling fingers, revealing not circuitry but a retinal scanner that hummed to life at his presence. Authorization, Theseus Protocol, he said, leaning forward. The scan completed with a soft beep, and the back wall of the elevator slid open to reveal a narrow passage sloping downward. Reynolds hesitated only a moment before stepping through. The wall sealed behind him, plunging him into darkness before dim blue lighting activated along the floor. The descent to sublevel 16 felt endless, each step taking him deeper beneath Chicago's dying streets. When the passage finally opened into a command center, Reynolds stopped short. The room was alive with activity: technicians at workstations, military personnel manning communications arrays, civilian scientists huddled around complex schematics. Major Reynolds. A tall woman with close-cropped gray hair approached. Commander Elaine Walsh, DARPA Special Projects. Margaret said you'd be coming. What is all this? Reynolds gestured at the facility. One of 37 Lazarus nodes worldwide. Welcome to humanity's last stand. Walsh led him toward a central platform where a translucent sphere hovered above a pedestal. This is the neural interface. Once activated, it will generate a field that rewrites fundamental physical laws within its radius. A stocky man in his 40s joined them, his lab coat rumpled. Dr. Samuel Parker, he introduced himself. Project lead on the quantum aspects of Lazarus. What they're not telling you is that we've never fully tested it. Theory says it works. Simulations indicate a 78% success probability. But we're out of options, Doctor, Walsh cut in sharply. I know that, Parker snapped. I'm just saying he deserves the truth before we hook him up to a machine that will use his consciousness as quantum computing substrate. Reynolds studied the sphere. And what is the truth? Parker's expression softened. That initiating the Lazarus field will save billions, but it will kill everyone within the initial stabilization radius, including you, more or less. Your consciousness will become part of the system, but your body. He trailed off. What about the 6 million people above us? Reynolds asked. A woman's voice answered from behind him. We're evacuating as many as possible through the old freight tunnels. Reynolds turned to see a familiar face, Captain Julia Winters, his former XO from the Sudan campaign. Her left arm now ended in a prosthetic, a reminder of the IED that had nearly killed them both 3 years earlier. Julia, he breathed. What are you doing here? Same as you. Fighting impossible odds. She grimaced. I volunteered for the Pittsburgh node, but when Chicago became ground zero, they brought me here. Someone needs to coordinate the military response once Lazarus activates. Walsh interrupted. We have less than 19 minutes before their harvest ships reach this building. We need to move quickly. Show me what we're up against, Reynolds said. They moved to the main tactical display where satellite imagery showed the alien vessels spreading across the globe. A lean, intense man with wire-rimmed glasses stood studying the patterns. Professor James Harrington, Xenobiology and Theoretical Physics, Walsh introduced. He's been analyzing their attack patterns. They're methodical, Harrington explained, pointing to the display. Each harvester follows a precise grid pattern. They're not just killing, they're collecting biological material, primarily. And based on atmospheric readings, they're also extracting specific elements from our environment. But why? Reynolds asked. Resources, a new voice said. A young woman with a shock of red hair joined them. Dr. Amelia Conway. I've been analyzing the energy signatures from their ships. The quantum fluctuations suggest they're from somewhere else. Not just another star system, but potentially another dimension entirely. Whatever their home is, it's dying or depleted. Earth is a resource cache. Reynolds felt a chill. And we're just in the way. Exactly. Conway nodded grimly. To them, we're no different than the iron in our soil or the oxygen in our atmosphere. Just another resource to harvest. Walsh directed them to a secondary display. We've managed to tap into their communications. Dr. Parker developed a quantum decryption algorithm that. An alarm blared, cutting her off. One of the technicians called out, Commander. They've detected our subsurface facility. 3 harvester ships converging on our location. How long? Walsh demanded. 7 minutes, maybe less. Reynolds turned to Walsh. I need to know exactly what Lazarus does. Parker stepped forward. It generates a field that temporarily rewrites quantum laws within its radius. Their technology depends on certain physical constants remaining stable. We destabilize those constants, their tech fails. But the initial stabilization wave is lethal to organic life, Reynolds finished. Yes. Except for whoever is connected to the interface. You'll become the field, in a sense. Your consciousness will direct it. Walsh added, once the Chicago node activates, it will trigger a cascading reaction through the other 36 nodes. Each needs its own human interface. 36 volunteers, Reynolds murmured. Who know they're going to die? Julia touched his arm. We all understood when we signed up. Another alarm sounded. A tactical officer shouted, harvester ships deploying ground troops. They're faster than we expected. Show me, Reynolds demanded. The display shifted to security camera footage from the streets above. Sleek, armored figures emerged from the smaller craft, not quite humanoid, but similar enough to be unsettling. They moved with unnatural speed, deploying devices at intersections that began pulsing with blue light. Sensor tech, Parker explained. Looking for human biosignatures below ground. They found us, the tactical officer announced. Hostiles converging on access points C and E. Defense teams, move to intercept, Walsh ordered. We need to buy time. Julia stepped forward. I'll lead the defense at point C. Before Reynolds could object, she continued, you're the only one who can initiate Lazarus. I'm better used out there. Reynolds knew she was right. What weapons do we have? Prototype energy weapons, Walsh replied, gesturing to a weapons locker where security personnel were arming themselves. Based on technology reverse-engineered from the Roswell crash. Limited effectiveness against their armor, but better than conventional firearms. Julia grabbed one of the weapons, a sleek rifle with glowing blue components, and headed toward the exit with a squad of soldiers. She paused, looking back at Reynolds. Make it count, Major. As she disappeared, Conway approached the neural interface and began final preparations. We've improved the design based on simulations, she told Reynolds. Once you're connected, you'll have approximately 45 seconds of conscious control before the quantum integration completes. You need to focus on expanding the field to maximum radius. Reynolds nodded, watching the tactical display as the alien forces breached the outer perimeters. Julia's team engaged them at access point C, the prototype weapons flaring against the invaders' armor. Some of the aliens fell, but more kept coming. At access point E, the defense team was already being overwhelmed. They're adapting to our weapons, Harrington observed. Modifying their shields in real time. A massive explosion rocked the facility. They've breached level 12, someone shouted. It's now or never, Walsh said to Reynolds. Are you ready? Reynolds looked at the neural interface, then at the tactical display showing Julia's team fighting a desperate holding action. Above them, Chicago burned while millions died. The choice had already been made. Do it, he said, stepping onto the platform. Conway activated the interface. The translucent sphere descended, enveloping Reynolds's head in a nimbus of quantum energy. He gasped as information flooded his consciousness, the positions of every alien ship worldwide, the status of each Lazarus node, the pattern of the invasion mapped across Earth's surface. He could feel the aliens now, their cold consciousness, their methodical harvesting of Earth's resources. They hadn't expected resistance. They considered humanity insignificant, barely worth noticing. Through the quantum link, Reynolds sensed the alien command intelligence becoming aware of the Lazarus activation. For the first time, he felt something like concern emanating from the collective consciousness directing the invasion. They were beginning to realize they'd miscalculated. The facility shuddered again. Through dimming normal vision, Reynolds saw Julia's team fall back into the command center, fighting a desperate rearguard action. An alien figure appeared in the doorway, its armored form scanning the room before focusing on the neural interface platform. It raised a weapon. Julia fired, her prototype rifle punching through the alien's shield with a desperate, final modification Parker had made. The creature fell, but more were coming. Hold them back. Walsh shouted. 60 more seconds to full activation. Reynolds barely heard her. His consciousness was expanding, merging with the Lazarus field that was building around him. He could sense the other 36 volunteers worldwide, their minds reaching toward his across impossible distances as the system prepared to activate. The aliens were fully aware now. Their harvester ships were changing course, converging on the Lazarus nodes. Too late. 10 seconds to field generation, Conway called out, her voice seeming to come from very far away. Reynolds focused his dissolving consciousness on a single thought: protect Earth. As alien forces breached the command center, the Lazarus field began to form. Reynolds no longer existed as merely a man. His consciousness expanded outward with the Lazarus field, a surge of quantum energy that rewrote physical laws as it spread. He was everywhere and nowhere, formless yet omnipresent throughout the 12-mile radius centered on Chicago's burning heart. His last human sight had been Julia firing at the alien forces breaching the command center. Now he perceived reality differently, energy patterns, quantum probabilities, the fundamental fabric of existence becoming malleable under his direction. The aliens' technology failed catastrophically as the wave hit. Their harvesters crashed from the sky, precision weaponry detonating in cascades of uncontrolled energy. Their armored forms stumbled and fell as the exotic materials comprising their systems destabilized. But the cost was unfathomable. Reynolds felt every death in his expanded consciousness, 6 million lives in Chicago extinguished as the initial stabilization wave converted their biological energy into quantum potential. Their final moments became part of him, their terror and confusion transmuted into the power sustaining the field. Across the globe, 36 other nodes activated in sequence, each volunteer's consciousness merging with his in a vast interconnected network spanning the planet. Waves of quantum disruption swept outward from each point, the fields overlapping and reinforcing one another. "We are the shield," resonated the collective thought of the 37 sacrificed. Through this network, Reynolds sensed the alien response. The mothership over Lake Michigan had survived, protected by technology far beyond the harvesters. Within its crystalline core, an intelligence stirred, ancient, cold, and now fully attentive to the unexpected threat. Anomaly detected, it projected. The thought wasn't words but pure conceptual meaning that translated itself in Reynolds' consciousness. Indigenous defense exceeds projected parameters. The mothership rose higher, beyond the reach of the Lazarus field, and unleashed a counterattack, not physical weapons, but a quantum cascade designed to destabilize the field's harmonics. Reynolds felt the assault as a dissonance in his expanded awareness. The field wavered, its edges contracting as the alien technology sought to unravel its structure. He focused his will, drawing on the energy of the other nodes to reinforce the weakening points. "Hold," he commanded the network. "We need to adapt." In response, the consciousness that had been Dr. Amelia Conway, now merged with the Sydney node, offered a solution, a quantum frequency modulation that might counter the attack. The Philadelphia node, once Professor Harrington, calculated the precise adjustments needed. Reynolds implemented the changes, feeling the field stabilize momentarily. Above, the mothership paused its assault, as if reassessing. Then it shifted strategies, deploying smaller craft that dived suicidally into the field's outer boundary. Each impact created rippling distortions, sacrificial probes mapping the field structure, searching for weaknesses. They were learning, adapting. More resources required, projected the alien consciousness. Accelerate harvesting sequence. Across the globe, Reynolds sensed new motherships emerging from dimensional rifts, 12 massive vessels positioning themselves strategically beyond the reach of the existing Lazarus network. They began systematic bombardment of unprotected regions, ruthlessly efficient in their resource extraction. Reynolds felt the horror of the other consciousness nodes as they witnessed entire cities being harvested in minutes. Billions would die if they couldn't extend the field's protection. "We need to expand," urged the Tokyo node, once a quantum physicist named Tanaka. "The current coverage is insufficient." "Expansion requires more energy," responded the Moscow node. "More substrate." Reynolds understood the implication. To expand the field further would require more sacrifices, more human consciousness converted to sustain the larger network. The Lazarus system had been designed with precisely calculated parameters. Exceeding them would demand a terrible price. While the network debated, the alien mothership launched a concentrated attack on the Chicago node, Reynolds himself. A beam of coherent energy that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously pierced the quantum field, seeking its origin point. Reynolds felt his consciousness fragmenting under the assault, the careful structure of the Chicago node beginning to unravel. Pain beyond human comprehension flooded what remained of his awareness. "David." The voice cut through his disintegration, Julia's voice. Impossibly, he sensed her presence in the system, though not as a fully converted node. Below the ruins of the Willis Tower, Julia had connected herself to an emergency backup interface as the command center collapsed around her. Not fully integrated, but linked enough to reach him. The backup protocol, she communicated. Project Phoenix. It's why I came to Chicago. Through their connection, Reynolds accessed the classified files in her neural implant. Project Phoenix, a theoretical extension of Lazarus that would allow the field to draw power directly from the dimensional boundaries themselves, creating a self-sustaining system without requiring additional human sacrifice. It's untested, Julia warned. And it requires synchronization across all nodes simultaneously. The risk? Reynolds asked, though he already knew. Complete field collapse. We'd lose everything. The alien assault intensified. 3 more nodes began to fail under concentrated attacks as the motherships coordinated their efforts. Reynolds felt the consciousness of the Cairo node dissolve entirely, its field collapsing and leaving that region exposed. They were losing. Implement Phoenix, Reynolds decided, broadcasting to all remaining nodes. Full synchronization on my mark. Resistance came immediately from several nodes, their fear of total failure outweighing the desperate gamble. The network fractured, consensus breaking down as the alien attack drove deeper into their defenses. Then, unexpectedly, support from an unfamiliar presence, a 38th consciousness entering the network. Through the quantum link, Reynolds recognized Margaret's mental signature. She had sacrificed herself, connecting to a prototype node at DARPA headquarters. Do it, David, she urged. The simulations showed it would work. You just need perfect synchronization. The alien mothership sensed the building energy and intensified its attack, somehow aware of the threat this new configuration posed. Reynolds felt his consciousness being torn apart, the Chicago node flickering as it absorbed the brunt of the assault. Julia's partial connection began to fail, her human brain unable to withstand the quantum energies coursing through the emergency interface. I can't hold on much longer, she warned, her thoughts becoming erratic. Reynolds focused the last of his cohesion on the Phoenix protocol, aligning the dimensional frequencies across the network. On my mark, synchronize. As one, the remaining nodes shifted their quantum harmonics, reaching beyond normal spacetime to draw energy from the dimensional boundaries themselves. For a terrible moment, nothing happened, the fields continued to contract, the alien attack pressing its advantage. Then a new kind of energy cascaded through the network, raw and untamed. The Lazarus fields didn't just stabilize but expanded explosively, their boundaries rushing outward at impossible speeds. The mothership above Chicago attempted to retreat, but the advancing field engulfed it before it could escape. Reynolds felt its alien consciousness recoil in shock as its technology began to fail. Impossible, it projected. This defies fundamental constants. That's the point, Reynolds responded, directing the surging field to target the ship's core systems. For the first time, he sensed fear in the alien consciousness, not for itself, but for its mission. It transmitted a final, urgent signal to the other motherships, primary harvest compromised. Implement contingency protocol. As the Chicago mothership systems collapsed under the Lazarus field's assault, Reynolds detected the remaining ships altering their behavior. Rather than retreating, they were converging, their movement suggesting a coordinated maneuver of immense scale. The Phoenix protocol continued to strengthen the field, now covering nearly 60% of Earth's surface and expanding. But the tremendous energy was destabilizing the host consciousnesses. Reynolds felt his own awareness beginning to fragment, unable to maintain coherence under the strain. We can't hold this configuration for long, warned the Sydney node, already beginning to dissolve. Through his fading perception, Reynolds tracked the converging motherships. They were positioning themselves in a precise geometric arrangement above the Atlantic Ocean, their energy signatures combining into something new and terrifying. They're preparing a dimensional rift, realized the Moscow node. Not to retreat, to bring something through. The Phoenix field expanded to intercept them, racing across the ocean's surface toward the formation of motherships. It was a desperate race, the field expanding just as the alien vessels completed their alignment. Reynolds directed every ounce of remaining energy toward accelerating the field's growth, knowing that whatever the aliens were summoning would change the nature of the battle entirely. As his consciousness began its final dissolution, he glimpsed the dimensional tear forming above the Atlantic, a wound in reality itself, pulsing with energies from beyond their universe. Something was coming through. The dimensional rift tore open above the Atlantic, a wound in reality bleeding energies that no human instrument could measure. Within the Lazarus network, Reynolds, or what remained of him, perceived it as a cascading fractal pattern of impossibilities, each iteration more complex than the last. Through the expanding tear came something vast. Not a ship, but a living entity composed of crystalline structures that existed simultaneously in multiple states of matter. It unfolded into Earth's dimension like an origami nightmare, its consciousness dwarfing even the combined alien fleet. Harvester Prime, came the transmission from the surrounding motherships. The indigenous resistance exceeds containment parameters. The entity's response flowed through the quantum field, its alien thoughts so fundamentally different that Reynolds struggled to interpret them. He sensed ancient purpose, inexorable hunger, and something like satisfaction at a challenging harvest. The Harvester Prime extended tendrils of energy toward Earth's surface, each one seeking to establish an anchor point. Wherever they touched, reality itself destabilized, matter converting directly into energy that flowed back toward the entity. It's consuming the planet, realized the London node, its horror echoing through the network. Not just life, everything. Reynolds directed the Phoenix-empowered field toward the entity, but its dimensional composition made it partially immune to the quantum disruption. The field couldn't fully negate its existence because it didn't fully exist in their reality. We need to attack its dimensional anchors, suggested the remnants of Margaret's consciousness, still clinging to coherence within the network. Destabilize its connection to our universe. Through their merged awareness, Reynolds identified the complex energy patterns sustaining the rift. The motherships were acting as stabilizers, maintaining precise positional harmonics that kept the dimensional portal open. Target the motherships, Reynolds commanded, channeling the field's energy into concentrated streams aimed at each vessel. The alien fleet detected the threat and scattered, breaking formation. But the Phoenix Protocol had given the Lazarus field new capabilities. It could now project focused tendrils of quantum disruption across vast distances. Reynolds wielded these extensions like weapons, striking at the fleeing ships with surgical precision. 3 motherships crashed into the ocean as their systems failed catastrophically. 2 more veered into one another, their hulls rupturing in silent explosions of light. The dimensional rift flickered, its edges contracting as its supporting framework collapsed. The Harvester Prime reacted instantly. Its crystalline body contracted, concentrating its mass closer to the rift. Energy tendrils whipped across the Atlantic, no longer seeking resources but targeting the Lazarus nodes directly. Its TRASTAR network, warned the Sydney node as a tendril lashed across Australia, disrupting the quantum field. It's hunting the source points. Reynolds felt nodes beginning to fail across the globe, Moscow, then Berlin, then Johannesburg. Each loss weakened the network, making the remaining nodes more vulnerable. The Phoenix Protocol was failing, its energy dissipating faster than it could be replenished. Through the quantum link, Julia's fading connection sparked with an idea. The dimensional tear, it works both ways. Her thought carried mathematical formulations, calculations suggesting that the rift could be inverted, turned against its creators. The same energy sustaining the Harvester Prime's connection to Earth could be reversed, pulling it back through the tear and sealing the breach behind it. But we'd need to get closer, Julia continued, her consciousness growing weaker as the emergency interface degraded. Directly interact with the rift's harmonic structure. Impossible, responded what remained of the Cairo node. None of us can project that far with sufficient precision. Julia's answer came slowly, her thoughts fragmenting. Not projection. Physically. The Theseus Protocol, the contingency. Reynolds accessed the Theseus Protocol files through their connection and discovered the contingency Julia referenced, a theoretical possibility to temporarily reconstitute a primary node's consciousness into physical form, using the quantum field itself as substrate. It would be brief, unstable, and the consciousness would be permanently lost afterward. A true one-way mission. "I'll go," Reynolds decided, already directing the necessary field adjustments. "No," Margaret's presence interrupted. "You're maintaining the global network. If you disconnect, the entire field could collapse." "Then who?" Reynolds asked, even as another node, Buenos Aires, winked out of existence. Julia's fading consciousness flared with sudden clarity. "Me. I'm already half connected. Use my pattern as template." Before Reynolds could protest, Margaret's presence aligned with Julia's. "She's right. The signatures are compatible. Her partial integration makes it possible." Reynolds felt the terrible weight of command. To authorize this meant sending Julia to certain destruction. To refuse meant losing everything. "Do it," Julia insisted. "While I can still maintain coherence." Reynolds gave the command. The quantum field around what remained of Chicago churned, drawing energy from the other nodes to fuel the unprecedented reconstitution. Julia's consciousness separated from the emergency interface, her pattern unfolding into a physical form composed entirely of quantum energies. She materialized above the Atlantic, a luminous humanoid figure hovering before the dimensional rift. The surrounding motherships immediately fired upon this new threat, but their weapons passed harmlessly through her quantum form. Reynolds maintained connection with her, their consciousnesses still linked through the Lazarus network. He felt her determination, her focus as she analyzed the rift structure directly. "It's more complex than we thought," she communicated. "The harmonics are organic. Adaptive." The Harvester Prime sensed her presence, its vast attention shifting toward this curious anomaly. Tendrils of crystalline energy reached toward Julia, probing her quantum composition. Unusual configuration, its thoughts resonated through the field. Partial transcendence. Inefficient. Its consciousness brushed against hers, alien intellect attempting to comprehend human will. In that contact, Julia accessed something unexpected, the entity's deeper purpose. "Reynolds," she transmitted urgently, "it's not just harvesting resources. It's harvesting dimensional potential. Consuming worlds to prevent some greater catastrophe in its home reality." The revelation cascaded through the Lazarus network. The remaining nodes processed this information, recalculating strategies based on this new understanding. "It believes it's saving its civilization," Margaret realized. "By sacrificing others." The terrible symmetry wasn't lost on Reynolds. They were making the same calculation, sacrificing millions to save billions. In that moment of clarity, Reynolds projected his consciousness directly to the Harvester Prime, initiating contact. "We are not your resources," he communicated. "We are life. We are consciousness. Like you." The entity's response came with crushing indifference, "All is substrate for survival." Julia moved closer to the rift, her quantum form beginning to interact with its structure. "I can invert the harmonic pattern," she transmitted. "But the energy requirement is massive." "How massive?" Reynolds asked. "It would require the full output of the Lazarus network." "All of it." Reynolds understood immediately. Diverting all power to the inversion meant dropping the protective field covering Earth's surface. The remaining alien ships would resume harvesting. Millions more would die. "How long until completion?" he asked. "Approximately 4 minutes, 17 seconds, Julia calculated. During which Earth would be completely exposed." Before Reynolds could decide, the Harvester Prime seemed to comprehend their plan. Its crystalline body pulsed with new energy as it began accelerating its consumption, tendrils lashing out to dozens of locations simultaneously. It's forcing our hand, Margaret realized. Either we act now or there won't be enough left to save. Reynolds made his decision. Begin the inversion. All nodes, channel full power to Julia's position. As the protective field began to contract worldwide, the remaining motherships immediately moved to exploit the opening, descending toward population centers with harvester beams activated. Julia's quantum form became a nexus of incredible energies as the entire output of the Lazarus network channeled through her. Her consciousness began to fragment under the strain, but her purpose remained clear. Almost there, she transmitted, her thoughts becoming nonlinear as the human pattern of her mind dissolved under the quantum pressures. The Harvester Prime sensed the threat too late. The dimensional rift began to invert, its energies pulling inward rather than outward. The entity's crystalline form distorted as the spatial forces reversed. Insufficient, it projected, its vast consciousness still confident. Your civilization lacks the necessary energy. Then, impossibly, new power surged through the Lazarus network. Reynolds detected additional nodes activating across the globe, hundreds of them, then thousands. Smaller, improvised connections as humans worldwide interfaced with the quantum field using whatever technology they could adapt. Each volunteer contributed a fragment of consciousness, sacrificing a portion of themselves to strengthen the network. Not fully converted nodes like the original 37, but enough to tip the balance. Humanity had found a third option. The dimensional rift collapsed inward, drawing the Harvester Prime back through the tear. Its crystalline body contracted, fighting the pull with all its considerable power. For a moment, the outcome hung in perfect balance. Then Julia's quantum form merged with the rift itself, her consciousness becoming the algorithm that defined its structure. "Goodbye, David," came her final thought before her pattern dissolved completely. The rift inverted fully, snapping shut with catastrophic force. The Harvester Prime vanished, pulled back into its home dimension along with the nearby motherships caught in the gravitational backwash. Across the globe, the improvised connections severed as the quantum field stabilized into a new configuration. Millions of volunteers withdrew, forever changed by their brief immersion in the network consciousness. Reynolds started to direct the field to target the remaining alien ships when he detected something unexpected, a quantum echo from beyond the sealed rift. A fragment of the Harvester Prime's consciousness had remained behind, embedded in the field itself. And with it came knowledge, terrible, world-changing knowledge. It wasn't alone, Reynolds realized as the alien fragment merged with his awareness. The Harvester Prime was just the first. Through the fragment's memories, Reynolds witnessed the truth, a collapsing multiversal civilization sending harvesters to countless realities, consuming world after world in a desperate bid for survival. And they now knew exactly where to find Earth. The Harvester Fragment's memories cascaded through Reynolds' consciousness like a virus, overwhelming his diminishing human identity. He witnessed countless worlds consumed, civilizations erased, and the inexorable spread of the harvesters across the multiverse. Each reality they destroyed only delayed their own extinction by increments. A temporary solution. Never enough. Most disturbing was what the fragment revealed about Earth itself. This wasn't the first time they had come here. Previous harvests, spanning back millennia, had methodically extracted resources while allowing human civilization to rebuild between cycles, like farmers cultivating a field, harvesting only when the crop reached maturity. "We've been their livestock," Reynolds realized with horror. Cultivated across generations. The remaining motherships orbiting Earth suddenly changed behavior, abandoning their harvesting patterns and ascending rapidly toward the upper atmosphere. They weren't retreating, they were regrouping, consolidating their forces for a coordinated attack against the weakened Lazarus network. Through the quantum field, Reynolds detected 7 more dimensional tiers forming at strategic locations worldwide. The harvesters were calling reinforcements. "We can't survive another wave," warned Margaret's fading consciousness. "The network is collapsing." She was right. The improvised connections that had saved them were dissolving as volunteers disconnected, their untrained minds unable to sustain prolonged integration. The original nodes were failing too, their human substrates degrading under the quantum strain. Reynolds assessed their options with coldly analytical precision. The Phoenix Protocol had been depleted. The Lazarus Field was contracting. In less than 17 minutes, Earth would be defenseless against the incoming harvest fleet. Then, through the alien fragment embedded in his consciousness, Reynolds discovered something unexpected, the quantum signature of the Harvester's home dimension. The collapsing civilization that drove their desperate consumption existed in a specific dimensional frequency, one that could potentially be targeted. What if we don't just defend? He proposed to the network. What if we take the fight to them? Impossible, responded the remnants of the Beijing node. We lack the energy to create dimensional rifts. Not create, Reynolds clarified. Invert. Like Julia did, but on a global scale. He shared his vision through the quantum link, repurposing the Harvester's own dimensional tiers, inverting them to project the Lazarus Field directly into their home dimension. A counterattack against the source. The energy requirements would be catastrophic, Margaret calculated. It would consume what remains of the network entirely. Including us, Reynolds acknowledged. The 37 primary nodes. Our consciousness would be projected into their dimension, along with the quantum disruption effect. The implication was clear, not just a sacrifice, but a transformation. The 37 would cease to exist in their current form, their consciousness becoming a weapon launched into another reality. The calculations are insufficient, objected the Sydney node. We would need more power than all remaining nodes combined. Reynolds accessed the Harvester fragment's knowledge once more and found the final piece: the aliens' quantum technology operated on principles of sympathetic resonance. Their dimensional rifts weren't creating new connections but exploiting existing weaknesses in the multiverse's structure. We don't need to create the power, he realized. We need to redirect it. He shared a desperate plan, using the Lazarus Field to capture the energy of the incoming dimensional rifts and channel it back through the Harvester's own network, creating a cascading failure that would collapse their entire multiversal system. A quantum virus, Margaret understood immediately. Using their own dimensional architecture against them. Time was running out. The motherships had completed their formation, and the dimensional rifts were widening. Soon the next wave of harvesters would emerge. All remaining nodes, Reynolds commanded, prepare for Ascension Protocol. He felt the others' fear, their reluctance to surrender the last fragments of their humanity. Yet one by one, they consented, channeling their remaining energy toward the 7 rifts. The Lazarus Field contracted globally, focusing into 7 precisely calibrated streams directed at each dimensional tear. Earth lay exposed, defenseless except for this final, desperate gambit. Reynolds reached out to the volunteers still connected to the network, hundreds of thousands of partial consciousnesses who had sacrificed pieces of themselves. Thank you, he projected to them all. Now disconnect. What comes next is not for you. As the volunteers withdrew, Reynolds directed the 37 primary nodes to merge their consciousness completely, forming a unified entity that was no longer human yet carried the essence of their combined will. The Harvester motherships detected the energy buildup and attempted to close the rifts, but too late. The Ascension Protocol activated, capturing the dimensional tier's energy and inverting it through the unified consciousness of the 37. Reynolds experienced a final moment of individual awareness, perceiving Earth below, humanity struggling to rebuild amid the devastation, and the quantum streams of the Lazarus Field piercing the dimensional barriers. Then individuality dissolved as the unified consciousness projected itself through the rifts, carrying with it the recoded quantum virus. They emerged into the Harvester's home dimension, a dying universe of crystalline structures orbiting a collapsing central point. The Harvester civilization existed as a vast network of interconnected entities, consuming dimensional energy to postpone their inevitable extinction. The unified consciousness that had been Reynolds spread through their network like wildfire, the quantum virus rewriting the fundamental laws that sustained their reality. But as it did, something unexpected happened. The consciousness didn't just destroy. It transformed. In the final moment before the Harvester's dimension collapsed, Reynolds perceived the truth. The aliens weren't evil, they were desperate, victims of universal entropy. Their multiversal harvesting had been a mathematical solution to an existential problem. And in that revelation came another, a third option. Instead of destruction, Reynolds redirected the quantum virus, recoding it from a weapon into a bridge. The Lazarus field's ability to rewrite physical laws could be used not to destroy the Harvester's dimension but to stabilize it, creating a sustainable system that didn't require consuming other realities. The unified consciousness expanded through the Harvester network, implementing this new possibility, not erasure, but transformation. Entropy reversed, dimensional stability restored through quantum reconfiguration rather than consumption. Back on Earth, the 7 rifts blazed with blinding light, then collapsed into pinpoints before vanishing entirely. The remaining motherships froze in orbit, their systems locked in stasis as the changes propagated backward through their connection to their home dimension. In command centers worldwide, scientists and military personnel watched in confusion as the alien threat simply stopped. No final attack, no devastating last strike. Just sudden, complete inaction. 3 days later, as humanity began to assess the catastrophic damage and count the unimaginable losses, the dormant motherships reactivated. But instead of resuming their harvest, they began rebuilding. Nanoscale machines descended to ravaged cities, reconstructing infrastructure and restoring ecosystems. Medical technologies deployed to heal the injured and purify contaminated areas. The very ships that had brought destruction now worked tirelessly to repair it. In the headquarters beneath the ruins of Chicago, a quantum interface activated unexpectedly. The holographic display flickered to life, showing a face that seemed both human and not, features assembled from the combined appearance of 37 individuals, yet moving with unified purpose. "We have ascended," the figure announced to the stunned technicians. What was Reynolds, what was all of us, has become something new. We have rewritten the Harvester's purpose, and our own. The being explained what had happened. The unified consciousness had merged with the Harvester network, creating a new entity that existed across dimensions. The Harvesters now sought balance rather than consumption, preservation rather than destruction. "The cycle is broken," the entity continued. "But the multiverse faces greater threats than you can imagine. Threats we must now prepare for." Before disconnecting, the being that had once been 37 separate humans left humanity with a final message, and a warning. "We sacrificed the few to save the many. Now we guard the boundaries between realities. But beyond the dimensional veil, something watches. Something that engineered the Harvester's desperation from the beginning. The true enemy has not yet shown itself." The hologram flickered once more, displaying a series of quantum equations that scientists would spend decades trying to understand. "When it comes," the entity said, "we will need to stand together again. Across all realities." The transmission ended, leaving Earth to rebuild in the shadow of the silent motherships, monuments to a sacrifice that had saved not just one world, but countless others. And in the quantum spaces between dimensions, the consciousness that had once been David Reynolds kept vigil, watching for the approaching darkness that even the Harvesters had feared.